Good morning, Małgorzata Bojnikowska, the Center for International Relations, Poland, Warsaw. Welcome everybody, our speakers and our guests and followers on another meeting we are doing under the umbrella of so-called Asia-Europe Online Bridge, which is, as the name shows, a try to connect people from at least two continents, Europe and Asia, to discuss the current developments in selected domains. We've discussed financial markets, we've discussed art and the future of art. And today we want to discuss science, life science, especially in medical science. Of course, the reason is pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic in these domains. Actually, I want to stress that today we are lucky enough to also hear some voices from the third continent, which is North America, because we'll have guests, also speakers from US and Canada. So welcome once again. We are doing this series together with the Think Tank Institute in Poland and our partner in Berlin, actually, who helps also to find the best speakers from Asia, especially China, which is the Hong Kong Trade and Economic Office in Berlin. And let me give the floor to Director of the office, Bill Lee. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Małgorzata. Really distinguished panelists and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today and welcome to this webinar. My name is Bill Lee. I'm the director of the Hong Kong Economic and Trade Office in Berlin. And before coming to Berlin, I actually worked in Hong Kong in the Food and Health Bureau on the health portfolio. So myself, I'm very much involved in the discussion on medical and health science. And I am actually very honored and privileged to have worked with many talents and medical professionals in Hong Kong. That's why I think it's really a very good idea that today we are going to discuss how the pandemic is bringing advancement in technology and research, and how globally we can join hands to collaborate on this front. So before hearing from the very distinguished speakers and panelists about their views on advancement in technology, I just want to give you a very brief idea about how Hong Kong's landscape in the forefront of the development of life science and medical science. I will just describe it in three different areas. Firstly is infrastructure. I think Hong Kong has really top-notch infrastructure in terms of both the cyberport and also the science part, which appears in my virtual background right now, which can help really companies, research institutes to develop their techniques and technologies in Hong Kong. And also we have top-notch medical schools and a very well-established healthcare system in Hong Kong. And also due to our proximity with mainland China and other innovation hubs in Asia, we are actually having a lot of collaboration with the talents in the region. So that's the infrastructure side. And secondly, I want to talk about resources, because we all know that technological development needs a lot of upfront investment in resources. And in this regard, the government is very supportive to the industry. The government has committed a total of 100 billion Hong Kong dollars for research and development, which is around 49 billion Polish zloty in this front. So we can say that the government is supportive to the development in this front. And also we have the third point I want to talk about is talents. We have a lot of talents in Hong Kong so that we can help to bring the development together. Let me just name a few. We are very honored to have attracted a number of top-notch institutes around the world, including the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who have opened their innovation node in Hong Kong, as well as the Swedish Karolinska Institute, which has also opened their research center in Science Park in 2016. Apart from that, we attracted talents from all over the world by a number of means, including the Technology Talent Admission Scheme, the Research Talent Hub, as well as a new initiative called the Global STEM Professorship Scheme. Through all these different measures, initiatives on the infrastructure side, on the talent side, as well as on the resources side, we are now bringing Hong Kong to the forefront of technological development. So really, without further ado, I will pass really the floor time back to Michalska, and then I look forward to the very interesting discussion with the panels very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill, for this introduction, and thanks also for helping us find people from Hong Kong to talk today. And we strongly believe that despite all the differences in other domains, maybe, you know, medicine and life science are the fields that globally we should cooperate. And that's one of the topics of today's panel, of course. And we would like to see how, you know, how far pandemic influences medicine, science, research in medicines, and also life sciences around it. So that will be the reason why we discuss it. I am giving now the floor to my colleague from Center for International Relations, Aga Ostrowska, who is a program director in our center, to introduce the panelists and to moderate the meeting.
Thank you, Małgorzata. So I would like to very briefly and quickly introduce our panelists, 5 panelists rather than 4 initially planned, because Dr. Vingnam Wong from Electronic Health Record Hospital Authority, Special Project Consultant at Food and Health Bureau of Hong Kong, Special Administrative Region, decided to join us very last minute. So hello, Professor. Good evening, actually, because it is already 6 p.m. in Hong Kong. We are operating in different time zones here. And we also have with us Professor Martin Wong from School of Public Health and Primary Care of Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome, Professor. And from our Polish speakers, Professor Beata Nowakowska, who is a director of Cytogenetics Lab and Mother and Care Institute. Dzień dobry. Professor Stefan Chłopicki, who is in turn director of Jagiellonian Center for Experimental Therapeutics at Jagiellonian University, Krakow. And Dr. Paweł Swieboda, who is Director General of Human Brain Project, like flagship EU project devoted to brain, and also a CEO of EBRAINS. It's the initiative based in Brussels, and Dr. Swieboda is talking to us from Brussels today, the same time zone, actually.
Yes, hello.
Hello. And before I will invite you to a discussion, I would like you to listen to a very short intervention of Jowita Michalska, who is not a scientist herself, but she is a founder and CEO of Digital University, and also she organizes Master in Robots Fairs. And she popularizes science and medical science. She will be talking about current trends in medicine and medical sciences influenced by the pandemic.
We have to understand today that there is a revolution happening in healthcare, and it is possible that the first time in our history, we will finally replace something we call sick care with the real healthcare. What I mean by sick care, it's a system within which consumers interact with medical professionals only when they are sick or injured. Healthcare focuses on sustaining well-being rather than responding to illness. It's a kind of proactive approach to health, which focuses on prevention and early diagnosis. Exponential technologies explode onto the scene all at once. We're about to witness the unprecedented rise of personalized, ubiquitous, and intelligent healthcare. There is a few trends actually, which are very strong now. And let me tell you about them now. Most of them, I think, is accelerating after pandemia. Big tech. Big tech's healthcare is the next battleground for big tech companies. I mean, Amazon, Google, Apple, and Facebook see healthcare as ripe for disruption and an industry when they can make positive improvements. Why do I mean big tech can be the next doctor of the future? We are going to see Apple, Amazon, and Google, and all data-driven companies that are in our homes already, with smart speakers, such as Google's Assistant, Amazon's Alexa, and Apple's HomePod, and they become our healthcare providers. While many of these home voice assistants started with simple tasks like talking about the weather and like surfacing cooking tutorials, they're already starting to move into the business of managing whole family well-being, and it's going to be continuous. Telemedicine. COVID-19 accelerated the adoption of telemedicine visits, which spurred a new digital transformation effort in healthcare. Advancements in diagnostic testing and remote monitoring, supported by cloud computing, machine learning, of course, low-cost technology, and appending traditional doctor's visit. Smartphones and smartwatches now take blood pressure readings and perform electrocardiograms. They use apps approved by the Food and Drug Administration in the US already. Phones don't just record data, they also interpret it. Next one trend is hospitals at home. Much more diagnostic tests are being done at home using connected devices, including smart mirrors and smart toilets. The everyday equipment in your bathroom will soon be used to collect biological samples for daily monitoring and testing. For example, Stanford University researchers identified different cancers, liver diseases, gut disorders, using motion and pressure sensors, computer vision, infrared sensors, urinalysis stripes as well. So this trend is going to explode in the next years. Sleep tech is also big business. It is part of the healthcare industry, but will become more and more important. By 2026, the market size can be upward of $30 billion. And a few more, which are also very interesting, as for example, digital twin. Digital twin is a lifelong rich data record of a person combined with AI-powered models that can somehow interrogate the data to provide answers to a range of clinical questions. There's more of them, like CRISPR and gene therapies. AI used to discover new drugs, and new usage for existing drugs has also accelerated in pandemic times.
Yes, so this is, I would say, a very optimistic and a bit maybe futuristic vision of healthcare, facilitated by the use of artificial intelligence, newest technologies, and also kind of facilitated and speeded up by the pandemic. And I would like to now start a discussion and ask you to what extent you see this impact of pandemic in your disciplines, and to what extent this impact has been positive. And I would like to start from Dr. Wong, because your area is specifically medical technologies. So tell me, to what extent this vision is present in your reality?
Thank you very much. And I'm Dr. Wong, working in Hong Kong Hospital Authority, and also supporting the government in pushing the e-health strategy in Hong Kong. And I absolutely agree that because of the COVID, because of the lockdown, it's fundamentally changed the behavior of people, not just the patients, but also the healthcare provider as well. And for example, in Hong Kong, during the lockdown, we pushed up a lot of telemedicine program and also smart health program to assist the patients who can get the medicine without consultation at home by drug delivery, by and also rescheduling of their appointment without going to the hospital, but receive the medication at home. And also because of the social distancing measure in the hospital, we push up the cloud computing to support the IoT monitoring of the patient's vital signs in isolation ward. And we also realized that because of the lockdown, the private sector, the private healthcare sector also puts up programs to have the teleconsultation for their patients at home, so that the parents and also the patients do not need to go to the clinic or the hospital in order to receive the medical care. And more interesting to us is that after the lockdown, because of the dying down of the infection slightly in our community, there are relaxation on those measures. However, we see that there is consistent trend that the patient, in fact, welcome this kind of service, and they ask for this service to be extended and also expanded in our hospital setting and also in the private sector. And therefore, with the better acceptance of our community, our patients with technology, because during the lockdown, they do a lot of online shopping, they do a lot of remote delivery, etc. And therefore, I would see there is a great opportunity for healthcare to adopt this kind of opportunity to push up a lot of remote care to our patients. Telemedicine definitely is one of our future for us to have a better use of our resources, so that the patient could be better managed at home rather than just within the hospitals.
So do you think that do you treat it just as an opportunity, or do you also can see some threats connected with the
Yeah, of course, technology is one side, because I think the technology is not a new thing. In healthcare, we try to be more conservative as compared to other industries, and therefore I do not quite concerned about the technology. Of course, there is security and privacy concern about remote whatever or tele whatever. But I think in healthcare, we also focus on the medical legal liability, insurance, etc. And therefore, because it's fundamentally changed the way how we deliver the care, through remote, through internet. And therefore, we have to catch up with the those kind of measures that could protect, on one hand, the patients, and on the other, the healthcare provider in providing the care in a safe manner and also in a legally protected manner, in order for this kind of service to be expanded and extended in future.
Dr. Swieboda, you called your project Human Brain Project, like technology inspired by brain. So there is a lot also data, technology involved here. So I would like to address the same question to you. To what extent pandemic has influenced your discipline, your project? Has it speeded up something, or maybe you can see some potential element that might be disfavorable for a discipline which is not virology?
Yes, thank you for the question. The pandemic, I believe, has speeded up a lot of developments in science more generally. And the most profound impact, which we will continue to see for years to come, relates to open science. I think the pandemic has really been a turning point in terms of our approach to open science and the embrace of open science. And what I have in mind is this. I mean, only in 2016, when the world was trying to deal with the Ebola crisis, there was very little data sharing. In the COVID-19 crisis, data sharing was obviously at the heart of the scientific breakthrough. And the big question for now is whether this will be a new normal, whether these new routines of data sharing, this new culture, will not only remain at the center of efforts in immunology, but will spread to other disciplines. And the one that I work with most closely, neuroscience, is very much also embracing the culture of open science. So that for me is definitely the main impact of the pandemic that will be with us for years to come. A related issue has to do with frontier science, because clearly the way that we are now slowly emerging out of the pandemic This is courtesy of efforts in frontier science, spectacular degree of innovation. And in the project which I run, the Human Brain Project, and in EBRAINS, which is a research infrastructure for brain research, what we are capitalizing on is a revolution in technology. From neuroimaging onwards, we are now able to examine whole populations of neurons, whereas only a few years ago, neuroscientists were able to study single neurons. So we are now able to move across the regions of the brain, observe neurons and their entire populations over the duration of long behavior. This is unprecedented. And the technology has now provided the scientists the types of means which were evidently beyond their reach only a few years ago. What this means is that we should expect more scientific breakthroughs in the years to come, which will help to address, in the case of the area I deal with, brain diseases, something that affects the lives of 179 million Europeans. So this is an issue of massive scale. And maybe just to finish that introductory set of remarks, there is also the other side of the coin, of course, as always, and that has to do with the funding landscape. The pandemic has inevitably meant that funding has been focused on dealing with the consequences of that pandemic, finding a solution. And of course, the resources are not insatiable. If you spend more on one objective, you normally spend less on the other. And this is a big challenge for the years to come in order to find an equilibrium when it comes to different scientific objectives. And that degree of funding squeeze, I think, is an issue that we will be dealing with. So generally, I see massive new impulses coming from how the world of science has addressed the pandemic. There is also a challenge with respect to the resources and the funding arrangements, which have to be shared among the many objectives that we have in this decade. Thank you.
Yeah, this is what we can actually fear, and this is maybe also kind of our observation, like ordinary people and patients, that we could feel for a moment that there were no other diseases than COVID-19. But we still have to remember that, for instance, cancer is like the most leading cause of deaths throughout the world. For instance, just to compare, 10 million people die of cancer a year, according to WHO calculations, whereas from the beginning of pandemic, 4 million of people died. So still the proportions are quite visible. So I would like to ask Professor Martin Wong, because this is your discipline, Professor, cancer. What happened in Hong Kong in this field of science during the pandemic?
All right, thanks. Well, I think the major point is because we are researchers, and then still we have to rely on publications and grants to survive. Otherwise, we would have something called publish or perish. So the situation is especially challenging for junior professors, like assistant professors. Say, for example, in our university, one assistant professor would only have 6 years before they're considered whether they could be substantiated or out. So it's called up or out, where after 6 years, they can no longer be assistant professor. They can either be an associate professor, or they need to actually drop out from their academic career. So with more than 1 year of COVID-19 pandemic, we can see lots of challenges and worries, anxiety about research, because I myself at least now got 4 clinical trials running. But people will say, I'm very sorry, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, some of my randomized control trials will have to stop. And worse still is that I've actually started that particular trial for say 6 months or even a year, but we have to recruit subjects again and again. And there is no additional funding to sustain an extended period of the project. And at the same time, I'm in fact also sitting in the ethics committee. I can see lots of applications for protocol amendment because of the COVID-19. The clinical trials will need to be suspended. The study designs will need to change from randomized controlled trials to observational design. And also there's absence of manpower, and the methodologies change from face-to-face to remote, like Zoom or Skype. And also we need to amend a lot of the ethics application to get approval. So there's a very big pile of papers or applications for revision of their projects. So I'm really afraid that this pandemic is actually quite unfriendly and also very challenging to our junior academic staff. And also professors at the in their mid-careers, it's actually very difficult for them to continue international collaboration. So that's going to be a very big problem. I just very quickly cite a very representative study from the Lancet published last year in August, talking about 1,200 people who have received and interviewed by joining a survey. And the study found that up to 80% of the researchers, they indicated that their research was very adversely affected in the pandemic. And well, in terms of the areas of impact, patient recruitment is the biggest problem. Inability to do research remotely is another problem. And more than half also actually expressed that they have problems in terms of recruiting more patients, provision of equipment, supplies, and also the other materials. And high degree researchers actually expect delays in achieving project milestones. So all our projects cannot be finished on time, and we have to apply for delay. And also publications and new fundings could then be adversely affected with reduction in overall funding, as mentioned before. So we are really, really very, very concerned about future research, because we need research papers and grants to survive. And I think this Lancet survey is actually very, very representative of what is happening, not only in Australia, but in Asia as well.
Have you actually experienced the limitation of funds for your research?
Oh, yes, very much. I'll share with you that, in fact, one of my trials might need to be completely terminated because of COVID, because it's a randomized control trial, and then the patients will need to come back for follow-up. But without, well, I need to measure their blood pressure. That means that their follow-up cannot be done remotely. We have to have their physical attendance to take blood, etc. So I suffer a lot because my project is only 2 years. And then when I apply for an extension for 3 years, all my staff gone. And then that creates a big problem. And we are very disappointed as well because, well, the project itself was funded, but it cannot produce any papers. So I'm very sorry I talk a lot about publications and grants because I'm an academic, but this is the reality, a very, very cruel one.
Yeah, current reality indeed. And how is it in Poland, I was wondering, because we've got 2 professors from institutes that carry out research. Is this danger, and are these problems also our problems here in Europe? The limitation of funding for other disciplines. Maybe I would start from Professor Nowakowska, please.
Good morning. Well, we haven't experienced this yet, but I'm sure it will happen in the next years because, as already was said, that the funds are just, you know, the amount is still the same, and there is a huge need to give money to the researchers who are working on the COVID and other viruses. So we definitely can see that the new calls are directed to the other disciplines that before. But well, we haven't experienced this yet because during this pandemic year, we just got 2 new grants. So that was a very successful year for us. But I can see it for example, in US, because we have collaborators from United States, we collaborate closely with Philadelphia Hospital, and so they definitely can see it, and they can feel that the money which was directed to the research before was shifted to other other subjects. But well, I think it will the result of what's happening now will feel within the next few years, because this is how the money are distributed and how they will distribute it in the next few years. So definitely in Europe, in US, we'll feel it. Well, I must say we are in the good situation, part of good situation, because I'm working in the hospital. It's an Institute of Mother and Child, so we work half in the research, half in the diagnostics. So we are not so much dependent on the research grants also, but we have also some money from the institute to continue the research. But well, how that pandemic affected our lives, I would say that definitely the research was well, it slowed down, definitely, because of the people. And as you know, if someone has a small child in house, they had to just stay at home for months. So definitely we can see it. We already have 2 grants as an institute. The institute is a grant holder for the COST, which is the European grant for networking between European researchers, and the second one is from the Polish funds, is POWER, and both of them, the goal of both of them are the networking and teaching young people, young researchers, sending them abroad. And for the COST, the main aim of this grant is just to meet and organize meetings, organize workshops, organize some exchanges between the scientists, between the laboratories. So all of this had to be cancelled for 1.5 years almost. And we haven't had any meetings. We had to cancel the trips of our PhD students and so on. So it affected definitely. We started to make webinars, but of course, everyone probably knows that well, the webinars are everywhere now. I mean, like every day probably we'll get some emails about the webinars, and it's also good and bad. It's because we are too well, it's never, webinar can never replace the real meeting and the discussion and the contact face to face. On the other hand, it allows to participate more people, especially young people who are usually not, they don't have funds to go somewhere for the conferences. But what, from our point of view, the COST webinars were not as successful as the meetings we organized before. So we started to target also the patients groups. So we started to get in contact with the rare patients groups where we educate, we tried to organize the equal management of the rare patients, genetic patients across the Europe. We even printed some educational materials, how to manage kids and how to talk with kids about the genetic disease for the siblings, for example. So these are the small steps which we as a COST, this networking researchers and specialists across the Europe, we try to do instead of just meeting and exchanging the knowledge, which was kind of we applied for. So well.
Well, because we can say that we can treat pandemic as also as a chance, a certain opportunity to connect and to share experiences globally. So I was wondering whether this, I mean, something that gives you like broader perspective and opportunities that you wouldn't be able to have before. I mean, the world has opened and became smaller, and scientists cooperate, can go to lectures, can go to theses being defended globally if only have time. And of course it has existed before, but perhaps we managed to understand it better and use these opportunities more to a bigger extent right now, don't you think? Because of course not having money and not having physical contact is difficult, but scientists still invent solutions to problems. So,
well, definitely the meetings like this one, for example, there are the possibilities of, you know, go broader, or, you know, to invite more people, or invite people from the different places in the world. But well, maybe that's me, but I think the online meetings will not replace the real meetings, of course. But we definitely have more meetings now than we had before. Maybe also because many people work from home office, so they are not in the lab physically. They work from home, and they have time also for it. Like I can say, for example, myself, that I had more time to writing grants this year than I had before, because, you know, like before I had to do the grants which we had before, and now we just had time to sit and think about the new ideas. About the collaborations and the sharing the data, I'm working in the genetics in the very broad genetics, so it's like mental retardation, autism spectrum disease, and, you know, this all very common features. So I must say that the data sharing and broad collaborations started, I think, a few years ago already, when we realized that, you know, with the big data from sequencing, and because now we have the possibility of sequence the whole genomes, right, of the patients. So it makes sense only if we have lots of data from different patients, so we can, you know, look for something very specific for this group. And so we have realized this, like, I'd say 3, maybe 4 years ago, when we started also our collaborations with Canada, US, and many groups in Europe. But but it definitely grows now, right? I'm not sure how much is the pandemic effect and how much this is because we have so much data now that we have to, we have to share it to make the possibility to analyze it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
If I may ask you, because you are the second person talking about data sharing, Dr. Swieboda was mentioning it as well, but I was wondering, how do you think data sharing is in the context of the necessity of data protection in European Union, and to what extent, maybe because we're talking about bridge, Asian-European bridge, also we have Canadian perspective here, because our other panelist also join us right now, who is from Canada, so I'll introduce him in a minute. But do you think, to what extent this data, the need to protect data, is disturbing to carry on with research in comparison, for instance, with China, where the attitude towards data is, I would say, more open?
Well, definitely this is an issue, and definitely we work on it to make it as safe as possible. And definitely we are not sending any data with the basic data of patients that you cannot follow which person it is. It's just under codes which we only know in the lab, and of course we try to use only the let's say, the most safe, as we know, ways to share the data. Now we start to work with the Microsoft, which provide us with the the platform for data sharing, which they said it's very safe, and only the people who has access, they can really see what's there. Even the Microsoft doesn't have the access there. So this is something what's, I think, for the future, for the future science, for the future research, is just necessary to do it. And we have to, of course, think about patients, about the we need to provide the safety. I mean, like, we have to think about it. We cannot just send it by any way we want to, but definitely this is something which will make the science grow. If we don't do it, we will just not go further. That's my opinion. Also, because we want to start to include artificial intelligence in our research. It's well, we can combine the huge data from the genome sequencing of many patients with, for example, ultrasonography or pictures from the ultrasonography. And so this is something what needs big groups, of course, big cohorts, and also the very well, without sharing, it's not possible.
Dr. Swieboda, so how does it look from the perspective of the European institutions, this clash between the need to share data and to have open data and the need to protect them?
Well, the challenge is, of course, to have solutions in place that either work on anonymized data or are sufficiently safe through encryption to ensure the protection of personal data. And of course, in Europe, given how strict our privacy regulations are, we are very adamant on the technological solutions that ensure that that data is protected. However, what I would draw attention to is the potential of federated analysis, wherein data does not leave hospitals, but can be analyzed on the spot through high-end analytical tools. That's a solution which, for most research purposes, is perfectly adequate and perfectly suitable. You can describe this in the short term as code visit data. So rather than to send data, especially across borders, which remains difficult in Europe, there is a project that the European Commission has launched on the European health data space. It's at the very early phase right now. So this problem will be addressed, but it is difficult as we speak. So a very viable alternative is to use federated analytical tools, by means of which you can perform whatever analysis you want to perform on data sets without actually transferring them anywhere. So that's why the code visits the data solution offers enormous opportunities, and the focus there should be on developing these high-end analytical tools. In other words, developing tools that can give the researcher all that he or she needs to address the scientific problem. And I think that's also key to the phenomenon of extracting value from data. Because data sharing per se is only valuable as long as the data that is shared is valuable. And that means that we really need to focus on making sure that there is as much value that is taken out of data. And this can best be done by developing more refined analytical tools that can help to address the scientific question. That's the approach that we practice with reference to brain research. Namely, we've asked the researcher what is the question that he or she wants to answer, and we can develop workflows in order to help in addressing these questions. And they can combine different instruments from brain atlases through modeling and simulation tools in order to provide, again, a type of utility that can get to the core of the actual question, very often without the need for data leaving the hospital where it is deposited.
Thank you. And Professor Chłopicki, to what extent is your discipline data-driven, your research, and also what have you learned for yourself? What lesson have you learned for yourself from the pandemic? If you could add something to what has already been said.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to talk in this interesting discussion. First of all, I was happy to see the Hong Kong Science Park, which I visited. So that was really nice that you invited all these people from all around the world. There was many issues really addressed in this discussion. So let me just reply to your question, how the COVID situation affected us with a couple of short remarks in reference with what have been said. So as for the technology advancement, I think that this is really independent on the pandemic, and it goes really very quickly. Also in my field, you know, there is a absolute immense progression in artificial intelligence and in the areas which are not related to COVID. For example, in diabetes, that was a recent Nature paper showing that you can predict diabetes based on digital biomarkers from your smartphone. So based on photoplethysmography. So you can predict based on your smartphone photographs, vasculature behavior and predict the diabetes. So it's incredible progress, but I think it's independent on the COVID. What is really the aspect which I'd like to share with some others, Dr. Swieboda, I entirely agree that this open science was absolutely something which struck me in the time of pandemic. Really, it's clearly it was seen what is the impact of big groups, collaborative spirit, international collaboration, and how the science could be quickly advanced. So I'm sure that this kind of lesson should be taken, that if the science is done in that way, of course there's some competition, that's obvious in science, but generally speaking, the collaboration and concerted effort brings fruits, and that's an important lesson for me. The last, which maybe I would like to draw the attention, is that really there is some, I would say, skepticism about the progression in science based on what we see. And I would like maybe to add this for the in the last minute, because we learn a lot about COVID pathophysiology, but we also understood how little we know about the mechanism of the organ injury in COVID, which makes us think that our knowledge is really limited. For example, we don't know nothing about how the microcirculation is affected by virus, though the organ injury by viruses induced disease is linked to microcirculation. So there are many aspects which are novel, and we're starting to realize that we have knowledge about that, but the knowledge is really limited, and we don't remember the examples of, for example, other viremia, other sepsis, bacterial sepsis, and we don't remember that the mechanism should be similar. So my message is that our knowledge should be more broad, and we should really learn from previous stories, previous pandemics and other diseases to build a picture. This is the best example in COVID, that we were talking about vaccines and virus only, while pathophysiology of the organ injury in diseases is linked to cytokine storm, and it was present in other diseases. So basically, this is an important lesson, that holistic approach to pathogenesis of diseases nowadays is really important.
And I think that it is also important to realize that such, as you say, novel aspects of diseases, they require kind of international cooperation, because viruses, they do not have frontiers and they are a global problem. And I would like to ask now Ada to show us another video, which will be about this international cooperation. Director Tomasz Maciejewski, who is the director of Mother and Child Institute, he will be talking about cooperation with China. And I would like to ask a question to you later about how you think scientific cooperation looks like now at times of political tension, in a little bit. Whether science is above all these divisions, American, Chinese, European, Chinese tensions. So let's have a look at the video and let's discuss this issue later.
Epidemic, of course, indicated the need for extensive international cooperation to sharing experience, data, for example. This data were need to build the vaccine. And for example, our institute, thanks to previously established contacts with clinical hospital in China, in time of the epidemic, we received manuals and procedures from these clinical hospitals in China, and which helped to prepare our institute for various activities during an epidemic time. And we go through this epidemic with relatively few and low problem. For low problem, this is one example that this wide cooperation is needed.
So how does it look like in your institutes? Professor Nowakowska, I know that you've got some experience, not maybe with cooperation with China, but...
Well, yes, we have experience with as I said, with Belgium, with Canada, with United States. These are the countries where the collaboration is the closest, but the cost, as I mentioned before, associate almost all countries from European Union. Well, the collaboration still is very close, and I must say that we have online meetings at least one a week this time, and it never happened before. But well, and I think it will stay this way, like even after the pandemic, just because the collaboration, because it's well, it's closer, it's more often, then we have maybe a better idea of something. We started to write the grants together. So, well, we don't have a collaboration, well, as a Department of Genetics, we don't have collaboration with Asia, as our director just mentioned. It was a different department who had this collaboration with China. But I must say that, well, I don't know how much is the pandemic and how much is the need of going with the research forward, and how much we need collaboration to really make a big steps, especially in the discipline like genetics, where you know, the new therapy, and there is so many going on in genetics now, and I don't think we can manage anything without collaboration. So.
Yes, this cooperation is very important, and I would like to ask our Hong Kong guests whether you feel the need to cooperate with us, with Europe.
Yes, thanks. Well, I think the collaboration is actually a very important initiative because we understand that for publication of papers, when they actually appear in print, studies which are multi-center with collaborators from many different types of universities are much more likely to be cited. And now the academics are being measured or in fact assessed by the citations of their articles rather than how many articles they got in high impact factor journals. And I think in fact international collaboration is even closer in the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the use of Zoom is to be credited because it brings people together more regularly. And as previously said, weekly meeting is actually a norm. We need to actually collaborate with other people in various countries. So our contacts are actually really closer. And one of the very important interesting phenomenon we observe is that in fact, some of people who are not infectious disease experts like me, I need infectious disease people like microbiologists and also infectious disease physicians to give us opinions on how we collaborate with other people. So therefore, we extend our research theme and also breadth using a broader arm and to embrace the other disciplines. So we can now see more and more multi-specialty team in conducting research, such as pulmonary physician with critical care, hospital medicine, nephrology or cardiologists collaborating with an infectious disease expert, with microbiologists. That's actually an excellent example how the dynamic changed because of the COVID-19. And now we can see because of the pandemic, it introduced innovations that will advance the conduct of clinical research. So both the study sponsors and sites, they develop new approaches to conduct remote visits by telehealth, use, say, for example, home-based testing or monitoring technologies, and provide curbside or courier pickup, and also delivery of participant samples and investigational products. So these are in fact not expected during non-COVID time. But because of the COVID-19, here, the collaboration is even stronger because of the use of the above-mentioned measures. It makes all the outcome collection quicker and quicker. And in fact, there are broader new topics on a particular discipline. Say, for instance, if I'm a diabetologist, one of the very important questions is, how can the COVID-19 affect diabetes control among my diabetes patients? So that becomes a new research question. And there are other excellent questions which are related to COVID-19 linked to medicine, which could actually appear in very high impact factor journals. Now, another example is, could COVID-19 as a multi-system disease affect different organ parts? So if we pose a question like this, we already set an agenda that we will involve many other people internationally on a global scale in order to answer these questions. So I do think COVID-19 itself may have a threat on clinical research, but in fact, it also brings a lot of opportunities because of the increase in breadth and number of research questions, the liaison of the different members of the research team by using Zoom meetings and also different types of communication. We are closer and we all have a heart to fight the disease together, but not. So we are actually very interested to know the results of our research because this can contribute to mitigate the pandemic altogether. So this is my few cents.
And I would like to ask Dr. Wong about whether it is important for you where from the given scientist comes from. Namely, are you okay with, for instance, working with institutes from America? Are you?
Well, I think it's a quite challenging question for data sharing for research on one hand, and also data sharing for practical use on the other hand. And I think, of course, the data privacy and also the data protection is very important when we capture our patients' data and make use of the data to provide better healthcare through research and also through practical uses. For example, in Hospital Authority in Hong Kong, we established a AI lab, which we move all the identifiable data from our data set and open it up for the researcher, namely the university professors, to come to our AI lab to do the AI research. And we're still at the very infancy stage to test this kind of working model for us as a healthcare institutions, and to open up our data for our researcher in Hong Kong to do their research in a protected manner in some way. We are not at the stage of opening up the data as open data, which I realized that some other places in the world, for example, in the US, they have already gone to that stage already. And we will expect, because of the COVID, there will be opportunity, as Professor Martin Wong mentioned, that there will be a need and also opportunity for us to talk about international research, because we are facing the same problem, pandemic, universal, and we all have the stress and also the need to do collaborative research with different countries in the world. I think this is a good opportunity. And also I would like to supplement that apart from research, during the COVID, we have observed opportunity for a broader sense of data sharing for practical use. For example, with shared mission and challenges among different healthcare organizations and research institutions, we expect there will be more chance for international cooperation. And for example, when we talk about the use of the COVID vaccination record for cross-border travel, which I think in this post-pandemic era, and different countries in the world, on one hand, they push again, they push their citizens to do to have the vaccination, and on the other hand, they need to make use of those vaccination records to support reopening up of the economy and also the cross-border travel. And for that initiatives to be possible, it is essential for us to have the common vaccination standard for international or bilateral verification and certification. And for such purpose, we realized that we have to have a common vaccination record standard. And this is why the WHO and also the EU are suggesting the health pass standard, and also the minimal data set for both COVID tests and vaccination, in order for a country government to certify a citizen belongs to their countries, and also they have the right vaccination record in place for that person to go to other places in the world. And I believe, therefore, international cooperation based on interoperable record sharing and recognized certification scheme are all essential actions against the pandemic in this time and also around the world.
We have another panelist who joined us a little bit later, Professor Andrzej Czajkowski from Faculty of Science Physics, University of Ottawa in Canada, Ottawa. I would like to thank you for joining us. Good very morning to you, because in Canada it is 6 hours earlier, so it is really that we are in total 3 different time zones here. From 6 p.m. in the morning when our event started to 6 p.m. a.m. in the morning in your country. Tell us about international cooperation. Is Canada open to cooperate also globally and with China as well?
Hello. So first, thank you for inviting me to this indeed very interesting discussion. I'm afraid I don't have much to add to what has already been said by other panelists. When you ask about Canadian contributions and Canada being open to international collaboration, of course, it is encouraged, and the official policies of my institution are that this is very strongly encouraged. Now we have to realize that this is subject to some geopolitical realities. If some hostilities will start on international level, it will affect collaborations for our community as well. And I'm sure that Canada will not be among the hawks here, but it probably will follow the suit of other big players. I just wanted to relate to something that was said earlier about the opportunities. I represent the field which is not directly contributing to the struggle with COVID, yet when the call was made, many physicists tried to respond. So of course, there were funds available to people who were willing to tap into their expertise and offer something in terms of the COVID research. So that was, of course, opportunity for data mining, for modeling, for people who could make it part of their research, as well as some of the fundamental studies of quite interesting phenomena, such as, I don't know, how far the droplets travel in the air before they settle, or what's the reach of the sneeze, which normally would not have been researched by anybody. Also, the effects of light, UV light, various light frequencies on the viruses, which probably have been studied earlier, but not with that intensity and rigor. And I would imagine that some, of course, researchers who undertook this work will go back to their preferred fields after this is all over. But some of the collaborations that were open, I mean, physicists, I mean, all scientists, we don't like to waste our work. So I'm imagining that people will have a side fields or subfields in which they will try to continue this type of work. So that will be something that will have a lasting effect. These interdisciplinary connections that were encouraged during this time. What else? There's definitely concern regarding, that was also mentioned, regarding the limited resources. If so much money goes into COVID research, health-related research, then there's going to be shortages somewhere else. So, of course, fundamental physics, science might feel it, and we are concerned about this as community. The other things that affected us, lowered productivity, delays to graduate projects due to the fact that people cannot access labs, hiring problems. I mean, you cannot, do it due to the travel restrictions or due to the fact that people are locked down or the labs are not being accessible. So that these were all things that, of course, were affecting all of us. And there is additional thing which, again, because I was late, I apologize for this. Maybe it has been mentioned, but the increased work related to didactics, we had in a very rapid fashion change into this online mode of operation. I myself, I had to teach 500 students. I was given a week to switch to, in the last 3 weeks of the semester, I had to switch to teaching that group of students via email, via online methods, and I had to prepare meaningful, tests that had to maintain some level of integrity when proctoring is practically impossible. So that was almost traumatic experience for me, and it was shared by my colleagues. We all worked extra hours. I don't remember myself working that hard since on preparing courses since the first year. Typically, when you taught a course for many years, it's on autoplay. You can of course there's work related to assignments, related to testing, whatnot, but coming into class and delivering the talk is not a problem. Yeah. But now we had it was like doing it for the first time. So that took away.
We all had to adapt somehow to COVID. Yeah. So yes, there were some things that couldn't go very well. That I'm afraid we will not be able to discuss that in much more details anymore, because we still have a third round. And before that, I would like to ask Professor Chłopicki about cooperation. We're talking about cooperation. This is our subject, and Professor Chłopicki mentioned cooperation with Hong Kong. So maybe very briefly, if you could comment on that. I understand that for your institute's cooperation with China is okay.
Well, as I said, cooperation in science is fundamental for the progress, and that's everyone I think agrees. And as Professor Wong mentioned, you know, the collaborative papers also has a greater impact and are cited and have a higher citations. It's well proven that if one paper is done by one center, it is less cited than one paper made by two centers, and not talking about collaborative works incorporating more science. So it's not only citation, but it's also expertise. Interdisciplinary expertise from different centers and different approach is something which moves science. So I think no one has doubts about that. As for my collaboration with Hong Kong, we have a very nice starting collaboration with the Hong Kong University in terms of vascular biology, and I visited Science Park in Hong Kong, so it was nice to see these photographs. And really, I admire how the science in Hong Kong and China is accelerating, and the different initiatives which are taken. So I think definitely we should build bridges between European science and Polish science done in Poland and in Hong Kong and China. That's no doubt about it. And different initiative I like very much in the Hong Kong area, for example, attracting what was said in the beginning, attracting the MIT people to Life Science Park or Karolinska. Science is global, and we need to act globally. So that's no doubt about it. But all is related to people. So we need to build a network of people to understand each other and to have a common subject of research. And I think any initiative which will foster that would be excellent for science.
And to end our discussion with, I would like to ask you a question. What will science look like in the future? In what direction it will change? But before you discuss it, I would like to ask Ada to show us the third video. It is Professor Michał Czajkowski from University of Michigan, who will talk about the future of science, how he sees it.
How the science will change will definitely depend on the course of pandemic itself, yes. And on short time scale, I'm sure that the sciences related to RNA and development of the new types of vaccine will be booming. They will get a lot of funding, so we can deal with the COVID pandemic, but we can also get better prepared for any next pandemic that may come, and we can respond quicker and create new vaccines. And of course, those branches of science should be very much funded to prevent the next pandemics or help stop next pandemics. I believe that if we are really, as it seems right now, close to the end of this pandemic, I'm sure that in a couple of years, the funding models will probably go back to what they are. There's a lot of exciting science happening. We have really, in many ways, limited knowledge of how biology works, and we're just trying to understand it. So, and on the other hand, there's a lot of diseases that, are taking a lot of lives, and they for sure needs to be funded, and the cure for them has to be found. Talking about cardiovascular diseases, cancer, AIDS, there's another set of diseases that the vaccine cannot be as easily developed as it turned out it could be for coronavirus. Maybe those diseases could be dealt with now too more easily, but it's really hard to say. So I would say I have no idea how the science will go. There's, I would say there's a lot of interesting science, but it's just the landscape is changing of what is needed, what society needs, and as it should, So it will depend on what society decides it needs at a given moment of time.
I would like to ask now each and one of you to tell us very, very briefly in 1 minute and a half, because our time is running, what science will look like. What will people need, do you think? Maybe we could start from Dr. Wong, our Chinese guest.
I think telemedicine, AI, and also the health IT focusing on consumer informatics will be necessary for us to engage our provider as well as our patients to make use of the technology to help their healthcare in future. After the experience of telemedicine and also remote monitoring and also self-engagement for better healthcare during the COVID.
Professor Martin Wong, what will people need and in what direction science will go?
Yes, I agree totally with Dr. Wong's comment on telemedicine. In fact, there are also some sort of trends in Hong Kong where the researchers are now very interested in non-invasive approaches to diagnose diseases. Now, there are two important examples. For instance, in the field of gastroenterology, people are using more and more resources to study gut microbiota, a non-invasive fecal biomarker to detect colorectal cancer and its precursors. It's actually for the convenience of people and also people who do not wish to receive invasive procedures. That's actually really the way to go. And the second point also echoes with Dr. Wong's comment about telemedicine is the use of big data and precision medicine. For instance, we have a lot of colleagues working on artificial intelligence based on computerized and statistical models. For instance, using retinal photos to diagnose or detect or predict stroke or dementia and cardiovascular diseases. That sounds very fancy and also very convenient for people in Hong Kong here because we are all very busy and probably do not have time to have checkups. So any technologies which could make people more convenient to attend health checkup and also save their time, just like non-invasive biomarkers and also these sort of retinal photo, which can then use big data to analyze and also tell them the risk of having diseases will be a very important future trend. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Czajkowski, your short Canadian perspective?
Well, I must say I do not have really that much to add. It's interesting. I just wanted to point the attention of other panelists to the recent paper in Nature, which is exactly dealing with this. It's published on June 16th. I'm not sure. It's how the COVID pandemic is changing global science collaborations. And there's a bunch of very interesting data there. Based on this, I don't know if we can predict anything. If I could share a screen, I will show just one collaboration on the rise. If you let me share it, I'll show it.
Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I think a lot of it depends on what we will learn about the nature of the disease. And some of these things will, so this is collaboration on the rise. You can see what other panelists pointed out, collaboration with 3 or more countries. There is very interesting data regarding COVID-specific collaborations, which shows huge spike of international work, and then things tapered off after first 3 months, and now they're pretty much back to normal. And there is also quite a troubling sign of maybe of what's coming in the future is a decline in US-China collaborations that I think many people will be concerned about, which again, this data shows. It's again, last 2 weeks, so it's pretty fresh. But what can be said about the future? I think the science will try to answer the question of the day, as always it does. And we will probably, respond to the new challenges as they will become obvious. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Nowakowska, what's your intake on that?
As my previous speakers said already, well, the telemedicine, I'm a big fan of it when it's smartly used. And of course, I've seen lots of very nice applications to monitor and to maybe not diagnose, but monitor and prevent some diseases or some like, for example, for patients after the stroke, which Medical University of Warsaw just released. It's a very nice application, and I really believe we will use in the future more and more tools like this. I mean, it's like definitely, I'm not a big fan of the telemedicine based on what happened, for example, in Poland for the last year, when the telemedicine replaced all the visits which were scheduled or planned, or so I don't think it will go this way. We'll use it smartly, but well, for the genomics, I think the research will really grow in the future, and we have more and more therapists, and I think we really well, we are finding a new ways or the new therapies for the rare diseases, and I think this is a future of our patients. And so the rare diseases are rare, but they are very common. So so this is a future for many patients.
It's good, that is optimistic. Professor Chłopicki?
That's a difficult question and to predict, but I would like to draw your attention to two things maybe which are happening. One is that we start to understand that various diseases, even there seems to be distinct, they have similar pathomechanisms, and there's a concept of diseasome. So there are some similarities in the mechanism of the diseases which seem distinct. And that was the case in COVID, that we realized that some mechanisms related to organ injury are in fact fundamental and similar to other mechanisms to organ injury. So we can use other drugs, other thinking, other experimental approaches to treat these organ injury in COVID-related disease using knowledge from other fields, other diseases. So interlinking various mechanisms for our disease is something which is happening and will happen, and I think it will be an important trend. The second thing, which is related to aging. You know, the aging induced is a major risk factor for major diseases, and in COVID it was seen that elderly people suffered the most. So I think this will definitely launch the geroscience, experimental therapeutic, to find a way to slow down aging. You cannot you cannot stop this, but you can slow down. And there's a lot of work showing that if you slow down aging process, you prevent diseases. So healthy aging and somehow senolytics therapy or any other approaches to slow aging will definitely affect diseases, and these are cardiovascular, cancer, and also resilience to viruses or to organ injury of any kind of infection. So I think this is a second important avenue which probably will foster, but difficult to predict.
Well, slowing down aging is a great news, so I can't wait for that. And finally, Dr. Swieboda, what's your European intake?
So The Economist tried to give us a hint in the last edition by suggesting that the Nobel Prize in medicine should go to artificial intelligence. And that has to do with the fact that, of course, some of the most spectacular findings of the past few months, the folding protein mechanism, have been partly explained courtesy of artificial intelligence. But of course, wherever you look, there are new advances that AI enables. I mean, just a few days ago, University of Liverpool team demonstrating that AI can predict now 20,000 unknown associations between viruses and susceptible mammalian species. So there's hardly a day without, of course, new breakthrough findings like that. So that's AI. And secondly, I think personalized medicine will definitely claim much larger space. It has been in the making for a number of years, but it will now occupy a much more central role, and it will be applied throughout the spectrum, from in vivo genome editing candidates that will be offered for some of the rare hereditary diseases, onto surgical treatments. We have in clinical trials an epilepsy virtual patient technology that enables to zoom in at the exact place where an epilepsy intervention needs to take place. And speaking of the brain, I mean, the area that we are working on and where I believe advances will be enormous is computing the brain and linking structure and function. And the two main advances here are going deeper into the brain, so getting higher resolution, enabling us to see the types of details that were so far inaccessible to researchers. So one micrometer type of resolution, which gives you insights into cortical layers of fibers, and then going across the scales. So seeing what happens across the different regions of the brain. That is also unprecedented. And I believe that these types of technological advances will enable in the coming years also scientific breakthroughs.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for sharing these experiences and your insight from different disciplines and different continents. I think our time is up. So Małgorzata, back to you.
Thank you very much. I'm really impressed by this discussion. I must say, as a political scientist, I've learned a lot today. Thank you, Agnieszka, for the wonderful moderation. And my short summary will be that we understand that, you know, pandemic, it could be a replacement in a way, maybe in a good way, of a war, because it's a very bad event. It brings us into trouble, but it gives us also enormous opportunities. And if we use it well, we could have in the longer run very positive effects as well. One of these positive effects could be intensifying research in science in different fields. Of course, in the short term, it's a headache because, as you mentioned, some funds could be even cut. But in the long run, definitely the research will intensify, and altogether the funds will be higher for medical science and life science. That's number one. Number two is that international cooperation should stay really international. As Professor Chłopicki rightly said, science is global. So, you know, the politicians can put us in trouble, but science knows that we have to cooperate and we have to, in the name of, you know, mankind, share experience and also, as Paweł Swieboda mentioned, not necessarily transfer data, but maybe use the data and, you know, be able to do our research based on different data without, if we don't want to transfer it, without transferring. So I think this will be the base for science. And if we only keep international cooperation going, I believe the future of science looks really great, maybe not as great as Yuval Harari described in his book, that Homo will be like Deus, that we will really reach out 200 years of life, but definitely aging can be slowed down, and we will concentrate more on health than on taking care of people who are already sick. That's what Jowita Michalska said at the very beginning. It will be really a health care system rather than a sick care system. So I wish all of us this to happen. Thank you everybody for patience, for staying with us so long. Thank you, Ada, the producer of today's seminar. Thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Bill Lee from Berlin for cooperation. Małgorzata Bonikowska, the Center for International Relations, to stay with us in a month's time for the next online bridge, Asia, Europe, hopefully also Northern America. Thank you, goodbye.